You are listening to the cycling podcast at the Vuelta España in association with Rafa, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004.
Hello, I'm Lionel Birnie and I'm with Daniel Friebe.
Hello, Lionel.
Where are we, Daniel?
We're in L'Alcora, I think the place is called, and we're about 10 kilometres from where the stage finished today. Still in the Comunidad Valenciana. Very confusing around here, Lionel. I don't know if you found this, but with the GPS system, our Garmin, some of the names are in Valencian dialect or the local names, and some of them are in Spanish and, you know, the universal names, and we've come a cropper a few times.
Yeah, I'm just permanently bewildered, really, by Spain. I don't understand the road signs, really, and I went wrong twice today. I only had to drive 40 kilometres from the start to the finish and got lost twice, unfortunately. We're outside a heladeria, an ice creamery. Is that... we're not having an ice cream. We're just having a cold drink at the end of another hot day on the Vuelta. It was stage 17. This is the tale of the etapa before we get on to the rest of the episode. And it was a victory for Mathias Frank of IAM Cycling, ending a couple of pretty barren years for him. He had to pull out of the Tour de France earlier this year. A very impressive victory. He was part of a very large break that went clear. And on the run to the terrifying Alto Mas de la Costa climb, a very steep 4-kilometre ramp on a sort of concrete surface, Frank got away with Dario Cataldo of Espana, and they were working pretty well together, and they got onto the climb together. And if I'd been a betting man, Daniel, I probably would have said Dario Cataldo might have had the upper hand on a climb like that, but that was not to be the case. Matthias Frank broke away, dropped Cataldo and soloed to the finish in almost slow motion. He said at points he was basically going at walking pace. Behind, the rest of the break was trying to get back on terms. Robert Gesink was the one who was putting in a lot of effort to try and bridge the gap. I gather that he rode the climb on the rest day and knew it very well, but he didn't
set the
quite...
best Strava time.
Is that right?
Got
yeah.
the KOM yesterday.
Interesting. Well, were there any other pros out riding it on Strava yesterday? Do you know?
I'm not sure about Strava. Alberto Contador certainly did the climb. Dave Brailsford did the climb.
He did. Dave Brailsford did do the climb. Yeah, they went and checked it out for Sky.
Dave Brailsford also did the Angliru a few days ago.
Yeah, we went past it but not up it, didn't we? Yeah, it's nearby. So Gesink couldn't repeat his stage victory from a few days ago. He came up a little bit short, and it was in fact Sky's Leopold Konig who got second place on the stage. And there we are, no real change overall. Chris Froome was yo-yoing off the back. He was riding up the steepest part of the climb like a daddy long legs on the inside of a window pane. That's how he looked from the helicopter shots to me anyway. He descended at the Tour like a frog on a skateboard. Now he's a daddy long legs. And he was on and off the back of the group as first Contador and then Esteban Chaves tried to lift the pace. But then the big four in this race, Nairo, Quintana being the other one, the race leader of course, all came in together. So although it was a dramatic and explosive looking climb, it didn't really have a great deal of effect overall, except for perhaps Simon Yates, who blew up right near the end, didn't he, Daniel?
Yeah, he did. Had a quick chat with him at the buses after the finish, and you know, maybe a little bit of sort of after effects of the crash that he suffered the day before the rest day, a bit of tiredness, didn't have particularly good legs all day, he said, and he conceded some time in the closing kilometre, and probably it was a classic case of perhaps overestimating himself or hoping that his legs would somehow come good, and he actually went with the initial attacks by Quintana and Contador, and then he really sunk without trace from that group.
And what did you make of Chris Froome's style of riding on that climb? I don't mean style in the sense of looking a bit like a daddy long legs, but the way that he was closing up the gap and then dropping off, closing up, dropping off. Was that a calculated thing, or was he genuinely struggling and having to fight back?
I think he was struggling. I mean, the giveaway for me was the way he was taking the bends, the hairpins. There were some really steep bends on that climb, you know, up to 20% in places, and he was going as wide as possible on some of them to lessen the gradient. And, he said he didn't necessarily have particularly good legs. And What surprised me slightly was that there've been hints from Sky over the last few days, and Brailsford in particular, that they might try something, what the French call a coup de Trafalgar, which is essentially what Contador did on Sunday. And there have been hints that Sky would try something of that ilk, attack en masse in the first 15 kilometres of a stage, and today lent itself to that. As is my want now, Lionel, I recce'd the first climb of the stage. Yesterday I went running up it, but again by accident. I did that on Sunday as well. Anyway, that the terrain really lent itself to an early attack, and we thought another one might come from Contador or from Froome. Didn't really materialise, and Froome said that his policy from now until the end of the race, well, today it was, and at the Aitana, the last mountain stage, will be wait and see and just assess his rivals' form on the day, and if they show any sign of weakness, try to exploit it. But he certainly says that there will be no kind of preconceived plan to really put people under pressure and go for the victory here.
I guess it depends an awful lot on how much time he's able to take back in the time trial on Friday. It might offer a glimmer of hope for Saturday's final mountain stage, or it may well be done and dusted before the final climbing of the race.
Yeah, and today's climb was very spectacular, and certainly in any other Grand Tour it would have attracted, it would have generated an awful lot of hype, because some of the slopes are incredibly steep and it was visually very spectacular. But in the Vuelta there have been so many climbs like that, essentially. La Camperona, Penyagolosa, and so on and so on. So it was one of several, but it was quite short. And if Froome is looking for a place and a climb to make up a lot of time, the Aitana, which is the last climb of the Vuelta on Saturday afternoon, might be the perfect place, because it's 21 kilometres long, and that's by far the longest climb of the Vuelta. Not the steepest, but it is the kind of place where he could make up a minute and a half. And who knows, if he takes 2 minutes back in the time trial, which is possible, then
he'll lose by 7 seconds or 8 seconds.
Well, yeah, yeah. But the situation might not look so hopeless on Friday night.
Eurosport, the home of cycling.
So, Daniel, yesterday was the rest day, and there's always a wondering how people will respond the day after a rest day. It was notable this morning that Tinkoff were warming up on the rollers, perhaps looking to create havoc again, as they had done. The fallout of Sky's catastrophe, really, on Sunday, we talked about it, but we did dissect it a little bit more, because we were both at the Sky Hotel on the rest day. I had a long chat with Dave Brailsford about a number of things for forthcoming episodes of the Friends of the Podcast specials. I talked to Brailsford about Sunday, and he said it was we'll hear what he had to say, actually. What was the fallout from Sunday's stage of the Vuelta, the atmosphere on the bus, and how Chris Froome and the rest of the team reacted to what may well be a mistake that's cost the team the Vuelta?
It was a mistake, I think, and of course the day before we'd had a tough day chasing all day, but equally I think with Nairo, Chris didn't attack Nairo, but Nairo attacked several times, and Chris's aim was just to stay there, and which he did. In actual fact, they went up, when you actually look at it, they went up there on an average pretty slowly, actually. But that's what happened. And I think after that, we thought, you know what, Nairo's not going to be able to drop Chris in this race, and if it stays at 54 seconds, it's not a given, but it's possible and probable, I think, at the time that he could go on and take this, and so I think whether there was a little unconscious, like that was a tough day. We got through that tough day. We knew it was going to be a tough day, and at the start, the next day we spoke about the start, so how important it was. But the reality was that in that first 5k they missed it, and once it was gone, it was gone. There's not much you need to say to a team when that happens. They've got a good 3 hours to think about it on the road, and they know. And what was important, I think, then is to recalibrate quickly, because it's quite a shock. It's not often that happens to us, but it's going to happen every now and again in sport. And the question is what kind of character you have in terms of dealing with that. And for me, I think there's a couple of things in those types of scenarios. It's how do you respond, do you kind of start blaming each other, which is, I don't think, ever a good place to be. People take responsibility and look at it and say, okay, well, what happened? Why did that happen? And yes, but then you've got to move forward quickly. And I think in those situations when you do get a punch in the face, you've got to have poise, and it's testing, because you don't feel like, why? It's not how you feel at all, is it? But I think in those scenarios, just a bit of poise, and I think the best way to defend then is to think, okay, look, guys, from now on, let's throw the first punch. And we got punched today, and we should be throwing the first punch. And so for us, I think, it's then taking that, what was quite a traumatic lot, it felt, it's a big blow, And yet, on the other hand, we started the day in second place on GC, and we ended the day in second place on GC, albeit, like I said, it's still possible to win, but it's less probable. And so that's, our focus now was trying to make that lesser probable thing happen, but that might involve a lot more risk. And so they're the things that you sit back and think, okay, now then, how are we going to play this today? And I think yesterday, to be fair, the guys were straight back on it. They got out there, and it was.
You were hoping for crosswinds on stage 16. Didn't blow hard enough though, but you would have tried to rip it up if the conditions had been a bit more favourable.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Same as they ripped it up the day before. We'd have ripped it up then, and it's a shame. We're probably 5 or 6k an hour lighter winds than would have been ideal. It just wasn't enough wind yesterday. But they were going, yeah, and it'd have been fun, wouldn't it? But
was the mood bleak over dinner? Did you sense, or was it?
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's it was a blow. It's not. It doesn't normally happen. I think it's not so much that Chris lost time to Nairo. It was the way it happened. It was the way it panned out, and that kind of performance isn't something that happens often. And you got to deal with it, and but it's not easy, It's easy to talk about, oh well, we'll just focus on the next day and brush it off. But emotionally, it hurts, and emotionally, it's difficult. But then you got to say at some point in time, okay, let's stop and let's manage the situation and go forward. And we've got a lot of racing still to do, and you got to try and think about what does this group need to move them forward, and how best, what they need to hear. What's the best way to go? And to be fair to Chris, he's brilliant in that. He is a brilliant leader. You got to say, he was on it yesterday. He was the first, really good on the radio right from kilometre. Well, in the neutralised yesterday, he was on it. Kilometre zero, he's on it all day. He's chatting away. When they came into the final, they thought there might be a sniff of a chance for some crosswinds in the final. They took it on. So they didn't take back, and I think you can sit back and wallow a little bit and lick your wounds, or you can get on it again. And they were straight on it, which is probably the best thing they could have done. And there's a lot of racing still to go.
So Dave Brailsford making it clear that it was a reasonably humbling evening once Chris Froome had fallen away from being a possible or probable winner of the Vuelta to someone literally with a mountain to climb. And he said that they were fully prepared to try and recoup their losses the following morning. If the crosswinds had been a bit stronger, they might have tried to tink off what had been done to them. Obviously didn't work out that way, but Leopold Konig was in the break today, and that was a little bit of a strange one. And looking at how Sky are working in this Vuelta, it really isn't, it's not like a replication of the Tour discipline of everybody all for one goal, is it? Or it certainly doesn't appear to be from the outside.
No, Konig has had an awful lot of freedom in this Vuelta. We think he's going to Bora next year. He's going back to essentially what is the team that he left 2 years ago, which is now Bora. And yeah, it's been curious at times. I saw Froome yesterday on the rest day and put this to him that pretty much every other Grand Tour leader in the world kind of takes their posse of riders around with them, and they have a support staff, and they travel with them and they race with them and they train with them all year. The group of riders that are here at the Vuelta are not Froome. It's not the group that knows Froome and has raced with Froome and has trained with Froome a lot. And in fact, there isn't a single, you would say, sort of trusted, faithful lieutenant that spent an awful lot of time racing with Froome. And he said, he did admit yesterday, he said, yeah, it would have been great to have my Tour de France team here, and I would have loved to have Geraint Thomas here. And you can imagine Geraint Thomas would have been exactly the sort of guy who would have closed the gap on Sunday and shut that situation down. But he wasn't here. We've mentioned the fact Wout Poels wanted to do the Tour of Britain. So I think that's something they'll look at in the future. And also Director Sportif, Nicolas Portal has been the Director Sportif who's been present for most of Chris Froome's Grand Tour, well, for his 3 Tour de France victories, in fact. And here he hasn't got Portal, he's got Dario Cioni. And I think that's something they'll look at in the future. And there's no doubt, while Brailsford and Froome have been quite diplomatic publicly about what went wrong, and they've sort of been fairly empathetic and sympathetic towards the riders who really didn't show up on Sunday. I think behind closed doors they're probably scratching their heads wondering what happened. Froome has been honest and magnanimous enough to say that it was also he made as big a mistake as anyone else by not following Quintana. But then, various things have emerged over the past 48 hours, and it's a fascinating, this Formigal stage. I mean, it is going to be one of the great chapters of Vuelta history, because with every sort of passing day, new details are emerging. I was speaking to some people at Tinkoff this morning, and they mentioned the fact that for a few days prior to the Formigal stage, they'd noticed how the Sky Riders were arriving at the start line, and kind of in dribs and drabs, a bit pell-mell, a bit and often lingering at the back, and that might seem like a small detail. It's something that no one ever really talked about, but we talked about it a couple of days ago, how in the past this has been the spur for teams to attack other teams. They see riders dawdling really before the neutralised zone or in the neutralised zone, and apparently Tinkoff had noticed this. Another interesting detail that was pointed out to me today, and we know this because we stayed in the same hotel. Sky, funnily enough, were actually staying about 500 metres or a kilometre as the crow flies from where Contador launched the crucial attack on. So they stayed there on Saturday night, and several hours later, that was where Chris Froome essentially might have lost the Vuelta. And another thing, just general bewilderment about how the third group on the road, Chris Froome is in the second group, the third group on the road allowed the gap to grow so quickly to about 2 minutes. And one thing I heard today was that David Lopez was pulling hard on the front, and Sky were also pulling in the group behind. So the two groups led by Sky riders were effectively racing against each other for a short time. So there was a bit of miscommunication there. And there's an awful lot to be dissected about that stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key point is that the opportunity wouldn't have presented itself to Quintana had Chris Froome been stuck to his wheel, which is where he should be. I mean, we often make the point about how cautious everything is in the Tour de France, and once the yellow jersey is sort of on the shoulders of a possible winner, second place and third place kind of queue up around, and they keep a very close eye on one another right from the start of stages, and clearly that morning Froome was not attentive enough. It's all very well saying the team didn't get him back on terms, but if Froome had been in the right place when Quintana was able to make the move, then it wouldn't have happened, would it?
Yeah, and also Lionel, we mentioned how the riders lined up for that stage. I know a few people who noticed Yuri Trofimov, Ivan Rovny, and there was another Tinkoff rider who was part of the move, and they were all on the very front of the peloton as soon as they went through the neutralised zone.
Well, let's change subject a little bit. I noticed that you very deliberately described Nicolas Portal as a director sportif. Perfectly correctly. Portal is French. Then I will allow that one. On the rest day, just for a bit of fun, we posted a poll on Twitter to ask whether we should refer to the team managers as director sportif or sports directors, the anglicised version. I mean, the language of cycling is changing, isn't it? I mean, the English influence is being brought to bear. It's that's a fact, isn't it?
No, not really. As the poll demonstrated, I think.
Okay, well, I'm just looking for the result of the poll. I mean, to be fair, it's comprehensive.
It was in the high 80s or 90s, I think. I don't think you'll find in my favour.
I was roping people in to vote for me, but director sportif 89%, sports director 11%, and so we shall refer to the team managers for the rest of the Vuelta as director sportif.
Put firmly backing your kennel, won't you?
I don't mind. I mean, I think. Well, I know what I think. I don't You disagree with me? That's fine. There was another poll on the rest day, and that was to choose the latest Pédaleur de Charme, or charming peddler, as I think of it. The winner, again, quite a comprehensive victory, was Sam Bewley of Orica-Bike Exchange. Now, he won the prize for probably making the biggest effort to stay inside the time limit, having been up the road early on in the stage, getting dropped, but he didn't settle back into the gruppetto. He finished a few minutes ahead of the gruppetto. He was technically outside the time limit, but like the 91 riders behind him, was allowed back into the race. So I presented Sam Bewley of Orica-Bike Exchange with his T-shirt as a prize this morning at the start, and had a quick chat with him. Sam, our listeners nominated you as Pédaleur de Charme for busting a gut, I guess you'd say, to try and make the time cut the other day. Tell me about your day out on the road.
Yeah, it was a lonely day. Kind of enjoyable in a sense. Spent like 2.5 hours alone pretty much out there. It's stuck between the peloton and the gruppetto. And 15 days into a stage race, sometimes it's nice to have a bit of alone time. You don't get much of that, so it would have been nice to be in a group, but also some time alone with my thoughts.
So how did the race pan out for you? Because you were up the road right from the start.
Yeah, it was a hard start, and there was a big split early on, and I was fortunate enough to be in the front split, but there was a pretty scary group in front of us with Contador and Quintana in there, so had to do a bit of work to try and limit the losses for our team. And then once I got dropped from there, I was sort of stuck in no man's land and soldiered on to the finish.
You said a lonely day out there. What was going through your mind, and was it a rare opportunity to enjoy a bit of the scenery, perhaps?
The first thing that went through my mind was, where is the gruppetto? And then after that, I don't know, just sort of thinking about getting to the finish line, I guess, and hoping that everything up front had sort of come under control, and our guys Esteban and Simon were okay.
Were you worried about the time cut? I mean, you were in less danger than the 91 behind you, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, those short stages are always difficult, especially when there's 90-plus riders sort of out of the race after the first 5K. And it's only a 120K stage, but there's 3 mountains in there. It's always difficult to make the time cut. So I guess a little bit you're thinking about it, but hoping all you can do is ride and hope that you're going to make it.
And lastly, how would you compare the Vuelta to the Giro earlier this year? Obviously, you've had strong GC riders to work for, Esteban in the Giro and then Esteban and Simon here. A lot of work to get through, I guess. Yeah,
it's something new for our team. Sort of in the last 12 months, we've become a team that can really fight for good places and even Grand Tour victories. So the whole team's sort of evolving and changing, and everyone's learning their roles as domestiques or as leaders, and it's something new, and seem to be doing it pretty well, and excited about the future for that.
How's it changed your role in the team then? I guess there's just not a day off, is there?
No, there's not really a day off. When you have ambitions to try to win the overall, you've got to be switched on for 21 days. You can't really make any mistakes. You can't miss any splits. So you've got to be, the whole team, 9 guys, have got to be switched on, doing their job, making sure the leaders are protected and serviced, and ensure that we can control everything we can control, not to miss those splits or those moments.
And on a day like today, when the race really starts before kilometre zero, because I'm looking at you and all your teammates warming up before the start, just in case, I guess.
Yeah, we saw Tinkoff warming up, so we thought we'd better warm up as well.
Interesting hearing from Sam Bewley there, Daniel, just how much the riders keeping an eye on each other at the start. He said there that the Orica riders noticed that the Tinkoff riders were warming up. The 2 buses were parked side by side in the car park this morning, and as Sam Bewley said there, they thought they'd better warm up as well. And I think the whole Orica team was warming up in anticipation of a potentially tricky start again. One of the themes of this week has certainly been people saying just how hard this race has been. Not necessarily long, but very, very intense racing right from the start of stages. The route profiles in the road book that don't necessarily bear much resemblance to the road that awaits the riders. Lots of climbs that turn out to be much harder than they appear, or like today's profile was basically made it appear like it was flat and then just the climb at the end, and driving over part of the course this afternoon, that clearly wasn't the case. It was another humdinger of a route. Do you think it's been too hard, perhaps?
I don't think the route's been too hard at all, and Froome also said this yesterday, that he's slightly puzzled by people saying that the route is too hard. As you say, we have heard this complaint that it's been a bit like one of Vincenzo Torriani's Giro d'Italia. Vincenzo Torriani was very famous, very fondly remembered Giro director for about 50 years, but he was also notorious for plotting routes which bore no resemblance to, or putting out these road books that bore absolutely no resemblance to the route as it was written. But no, I mean, it's, we always hear from the riders that it depends on how it's written, and it's been written very fast. And I think the key, the main factor in making this race very, very hard has been the lack of sprinters. What's happened as a result of that is that typically in every team, 2 or 3 places that would have gone to a sprinter and his lead-out men have been filled by opportunists, people here who need to win for World Tour points, or because they're looking for a contract next year, or because their team has not had a very good season, and so on and so on. They've been desperate to get in the break every single day, and there's been no sense of, there haven't been any stages where people have just been able to settle in and know what's coming, and in some cases sort of rest up for bigger days, bigger obstacles to come. And I think it's been eyeballs out pretty much from the start.
Yeah, it's been a tough course. There hasn't been the traditional flat sprinter stages or transitional days where everybody takes it easy, but as ever, it's the riders who make the race hard, and they've chosen to make it hard, or somebody has always chosen to make it hard.
Whoever you are, wherever you ride, whatever the reason, Rafa exists to improve your ride with the finest kit, inspiring stories, and vibrant clubhouses and communities all over the world. See rafa.cc for more information.
Well, Daniel, Madrid is looming. It's sort of visible just about over the horizon, although we've still got to head south and east down to Benidorm and the time trial, and then the final mountain stage on Saturday before it's an evening stage, isn't it, in Madrid, the criterium?
Women's race before that.
There is the women's race. That's the final round of the Women's World Tour, I think I'm right in saying, and that takes place in the afternoon before the final stage of the Vuelta in the evening. Anything else before we call it a day for today's episode?
No, not really. Just a few things noticed, heard, picked up on the rest day. A lot of agents in hotel receptions, as always. In the Movistar hotel was very busy with agents yesterday. No real concrete sort of stories to break, Lionel, but a few things that people might want to watch out for, I would say. Interesting one. Jonathan Castroviejo has been key for Quintana in this Vuelta a España. And I'm not going to say why, I've got a hunch, but I've got a hunch that Sky might be very interested in Castroviejo. He had a terrible injury at the start of this year, and I know that he's had to kind of change his position on a bike. I was talking to Fran Reyes, colleague of ours, earlier, and I think Movistar were a little bit uncertain about how strongly he'd come back, because otherwise he would have ridden, thinking the Tour de France. He didn't. They saved him for the Vuelta, and I think they've probably been pleasantly surprised. But there are still lingering concerns about whether he's going to suffer any long-term effects from the injuries he suffered. I think it was at the Tour of the Algarve in February. So Castroviejo is the kind of guy who Sky could have done with on Sunday. The Bahrain team is taking shape. A lot of discussions, as you would expect, going on about riders who might join that team. Sergio Henao, I think possibly could be leaving Sky to go to the Bahrain team. I think that's a possibility. Another rumour involving Sky, we heard a lot earlier in the year about Diego Rosa, the Astana climber, possibly going to Sky. I understand that's probably not going to happen now, and that he might be going to BMC.
Interesting. Well, one confirmed transfer is that Robert Kieselowski is going to Katusha, isn't he? He's currently riding with Tinkoff, who are closing down, of course. It's going to be strange without Tinkoff, isn't it? This is the last week of Oleg. He tweeted something about how yesterday was his final training ride at a World Tour or at a Grand Tour, and he'd be off. Farewell to the Super Tinkoff team. It won't be quite the same without him, will it? Might be better.
No. We always get in trouble, don't we, if we express anything resembling a favourable opinion of Tinkoff. But not favourable opinion, but he always provides moments of light relief. I mean, for example, 2 or 3 days ago after the finish, we saw him riding over the line the day when Jempi Drucker, when was that? Yesterday? I've lost track of the day. I had to Google what day of the week it was.
You said that yesterday.
I said that last time. Anyway, we saw Tinkoff riding over the line, and then 5 minutes, he disappeared into the Tinkoff bus, and then 5 minutes later, after the stage, we saw him riding off just in budgie smuggler, in speedos, on his racing bike, but just in his spandex speedos.
What a wonderful image! But he's wealthy enough not to care what anybody thinks about him, I guess. Anyway, that's enough for tonight's episode of the Cycling Podcast from the Vuelta a España. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow we've got a really nice segment with our colleague Andy Hood from Velo News, who lives in Spain. He lives in Leon, I think, doesn't he? And he's going to be talking about the Vuelta and its place not just in Spanish cycling and cycling in general, but its place within Spanish culture and the Spanish sporting landscape. Really interesting chat, so listen out for that tomorrow, because we are anticipating it might be a relatively quiet day in the race. It's probably it's a pretty easy looking route, no sprinters in the race, so anything could happen. It's one that's really up for grabs, so we'll see what happens there. But in the meantime, Daniel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lionel.